Hello modelers. In this presentation, we are going to explain our final projects. My name is Hakan and my teammates are Parisa and Mohammed. The title of our project is The Impact of the Tree Cover on Temperature and the Precipitation. So the temperature is increasing in the world due to the climate change. So making research on the relationship between tree cover and the local temperature are getting importance. So we aim to investigate how the tree cover affect the local temperatures. Our starting point is in the literature. There's a paper, the Triclay paper, which is published in 2011. She used statistical modeling with 2D cellular automate to describe three species shifts responding to climate change in the 21st century. Our research course, based on this paper is our starting point. So then our research question is how does tree cover presence and density affect the local temperature and the precipitation, and how can cellular automate affect the model on this introduction? So in this project, we investigated this relationship with two models. In the first model, our core objective is to provide the understanding of interplay between forest density and its microclimate effects, particularly temperature modulation. In the second model, which is the more advanced model, the present in-depth quantitative analysis of the role of tree coverage, particularly coniferous and broad-leaf trees, in shaping local temperature and precipitation pattern. After this point, Parisa is going to explain the Model 1 and its results.
So Model 1 is going to be a rudimentary implementation of cellular automaton and dynamic modeling. So cellular automata is just going to show the tree growth, and dynamic modeling will help us see how temperature and rain changes according to the proportion of tree growth. So the states that are in the cellular automaton would be state 0. Nothing is there, no tree is there. Instead, one would represent a tree in the forest. And the state 2 would be a canopy state, which defines how dense and how close the trees are together, creating a shade. Next slide. So model 1, the tree for the tree in initialization, how trees are being initialized is just randomly placing, making the cells from state 0 to 1. So random initialization. And the tree growth would be, trees can also grow randomly. And the main part would be how they are growing in front of each other, like how close they will be, creating a tree cover, because our topic is based on that. So for random probability, there's just a random probability how often do the trees grow, and the growth probability would be for the state, for the cells there. So for the states that are already one, what will happen is that it will start spreading to the neighbors. We are following Moore's neighborhood, so that's another thing. And random single trees grow in the tree cover. So we'll see in the simulation there's a collection of the trees together, and a random tree will also be dense, will also have the neighbors. So in canopy threshold is like we set a threshold. So what happens is that when there's a competition for resources, trees stop growing. So we haven't implemented the competition factors yet, but it's just a simple threshold to decide that when they are mature and then they change to state 2. So we are just going to see the impact of temperature through the temperature rate, how fast it changes, and the rain rate. So when we look more into it, the temperature and tree growth, we'll see that how the temperature changes. So when the proportion of tree increases, the temperature goes down, and the relationship is, we can see the total number of trees is high, the temperature is low. So that defines the relationship, inverse relationship. And so for the temperature and tree growth, we tried some values. Forest size is the size of just the grid. Initial density would be how randomly they are scattered on the plot. And simulation for 20 iterations, canopy threshold would be 5. Like if a tree has 5 neighbor, then it will stop. The growth probability would be 0.2, which defines how fast they are growing, at which rate, and the random tree probability would be how often randomly tree just grow. It's usually low because it's uh, it's assumed that where there are trees there will be like population would be higher. So we can see that the temperature is red, and as the trees are growing, it's going blue. So this is what it defines. The temperature is getting lower, and it's done through dynamic modeling. Next slide. So even for the temperature and tree growth states, as for the limitations, it's a rudimentary approach. There are so many factors that we haven't included yet, and we it just suggests that there's a big loop. And big problem with this model is that it suggests that um, when the trees are growing, it will only get colder. So it's not the case in real life. So it's the same problem with the rain levels. Next slide. So this is a relationship between rain and tree. It's just the opposite. When the trees increase and the rain is also supposed to increase. Not always true, but this is again the rudimentary approach. Next slide. So model one for the rain and tree growth would be we can see that when yellow it means the sun is out, and for the blue it's raining. So as we can see, when the trees are growing, and for also the growth of the trees, we can see if there is a neighborhood, they grow close to each other, and but there's also a random initialization of a tree, and that also becomes a dense area. Next slide. So yeah, this just assumes that if the trees keep growing, it's always going to rain. So there's a big problem. Next slide. So for this, so the topic is how tree cover impacts the levels of temperature and rain. So for this, what we try to do is that growth probability we set to very low, which was higher in the previous slides, and random probabilities we we increased it a bit just to see like if there's no tree cover and trees are randomly growing. We can see that how slow the temperature changes, like it's red, and then it becomes it very slowly adopts the new temperature, and and we can see that how fast it changes when there are more trees in a grid. Next slide. Adil is going to present his model too.
Thank you. Thank you, Parisa. So for model 2, basically, we studied the impact of two types of trees on both precipitation and temperature. Let's start with the temperature. Here, we studied the impact of conifer and broadleaf. Basically, we categorize the trees as per the shapes of the leaves. So usually what we can observe that the conifer, these trees, they have usually a needle or sharp like leaves, where basically they usually let the most of the sun radiation to pass through. And as for the broad leaf, which the name suggests that they usually have a broader leaves and they cause more of the shadow. That means they don't let most of the light pass through. So here for our first experiments, we studied in our cellular automata, we have a three state for each cell. One is the empty state. That means there are no trees. All of the cells are empty, which indicate the maximum temperature. Then after some steps, we add the conifer and broadleaf trees, and the conifer will indicate the state one, and the broadleaf trees will indicate the state two. And as for the temperature results, basically, as for the rules, we studied the basic rules by basically just mimicking the real world scenario. For the tree spread, in the initial steps, we basically add the conifer and the broadleaf trees at different locations. And once added, they will start spreading from those locations. And the conifer trees basically they are shown by the lime green color, and the broadleaf trees, they are shown by the dark green colors. And for the temperature decrease rule, when there are no trees, all of the cells are indicated by the orange state. So when we add the conifer trees As the conifer trees, basically they usually let most of the light pass through from their leaf. So we are only showing the reduce of the temperature at those cells where the conifer trees are actually exist. So that means they are not impacting the neighboring cells here. But for the broadleaf trees, they usually have a more impact on the cells where they basically exist, and they also have an impact on the surrounding cells, which is basically we are showing here by a color of yellow and by aqua. The aqua are the direct neighboring cells, and the yellow cells basically they are cells which are a little far. For the model, for this is basically the continuation of the previous model. Here we added a few other states for the tree grown mechanism. So initially, what we were doing, we are basically adding the two types of trees, and we are not studying the impact of the growth. For example, we know that in the practical world, the young trees or the trees which are very small, they usually have a minimum or zero impact on the temperature. So this is exactly what we try to mimic here. So we added the trees at different and random locations. Initially, they will be very young. Then they will evolve into the next stage, which is the ground stage. And then we will also study how the ground trees basically they are impacting the temperature. And the next stage basically is the mature and then the dying mechanism. We also added the dying mechanism, which basically after a few steps and with some probabilities, the tree will start dying and the cells basically how the dying mechanism basically impact the temperature, which are we also added in the simulation. So for the temperature and this model results, we can see initially we add the young trees at different locations, which is indicated by the yellow color, yellow cells. And then after some steps, they usually evolve into the next stage, which is the ground stage here. So this is indicated by the yellow green here. And the third state basically is either the mature state, but here we added a condition. We added some of the trees here, like for example, this cluster and this cluster randomly. They will evolve either into the conifer mature or the broadleaf mature. And as for the conifer basically mature, we are indicating that color as a green color, and for the broadleaf trees, we are indicating that as a dark green color. And then we can also see in the simulation that after some steps, basically, the tree will start dying here. We will observe that. But as for the temperature impact, when the young trees are added, we will not see any kind of impact here. But when they will turn into a ground stage, then we can see that they will start having impact on the temperature. And as far we have already studied that the conifer trees have a lowest drop in temperature as compared to the broadleaf. So we are showing the conifer or the impact of the conifer as the aqua, means they have a less drop in temperature as compared to the broadleaf, which we are showing here as a light purple color. And here we can also see that basically here the trees start dying and then we basically the tree will start grow again. And as for the precipitation, we studied the impact of the broadleaf trees in the first experiment. We did not add the conifer trees. So here we only follow one rule. That means which is the not a single tree cannot impact the precipitation. Only a substantial group or only substantial number of trees in a group can impact the trees. And as for the states, here we have a three states. One is the empty state, which will be indicated by the light yellow. The other one is the white one state, which is either tree, which will be the broadleaf. We are not adding the conifer in this experiment. And the next one is the precipitation. How basically once they will have a significant number of trees in a cluster, how basically they will show or how they will impact the precipitation, which is the next stage basically, which we are representing as a light purple. And as for here, we can see that we are adding the trees at a random locations, and these trees basically they are represented by the lime green color. And here we are studying the broadleaf basically, and then once the trees are added, the spread mechanism will start into the adjacent cells, also into the other cells, other part, which basically we are mimicking the scenario where the seeds will will spread in the forest by either birds or by air or by some other mechanism here. And this basically scenario, we can see that this is not a real world basically. Here, as soon as basically we have our trees, they start impacting the precipitation, which is not the real world scenario here. But we try to limit the precipitation by 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 considering the number of trees in a group, but still that's not practical here. So for the next experiment we added the conifer and the broadleaf, and we studied the same stage. For example, we studied the same stage basically where is in this experiment we are not studying the young or the trees impact of the young trees impact. We are only studying the impact of the mature conifer, mature broadleaf here. So in this experiment for the cell state, basically we have for the tree state, we have a three, one is the empty, the other one either will be the mature conifer or mature broadleaf. And for the precipitation, we will have four states. One is either is the lowest precipitation, then lowest increase in precipitation, then moderate increase and significant increase in precipitation. And as for the rules, the tree spread, we are using the same mechanism. Once the trees are added at the random location, they will start spreading into the adjacent cells, and then they will also start spreading into the other part of the forest by mimicking the scenario of the spreading mechanism. But here we can see that once the trees are added, they will start basically impacting the precipitation, which is indicated by the light orange color here, which basically here we can see the basically that impact is not very high. We will have a high impact once we have enough trees in a cluster. So that's where basically this light purple color comes in. And the dark purple is for the for the broadleaf tree, and for the conifer we are mimicking the light purple color. As basically we can see that broadleaf trees basically they have a larger leaves, so that means they absorb more water from the environment and release more water into the environment back. And as for the statistics, basically, this one, I would say that this is exactly has been shown in the experiments, and honestly, I won't trust much on this one because here this is just the indication of the impact of the trees on the temperature. For example, if we have a more trees, the temperature it will have a more impact on the temperature. Here, basically, we have a cells here. It's not showing the basically increasing or decreasing mechanism. Similarly, on this one. And as for the limitation for this model, basically this one is just mimicking different probabilities, different growth mechanisms, and this one can further be improved if we can add the dynamic modeling, just like a Parisa did. If we can have dynamic equations, which is basically we if we can drive those equations and we can model those conditions, those equations, that will be more reliable as compared to this one. Okay, thank you. And Hakan, you can continue from here.
Thank you, Adil. For the limitation, Paris and Adil mentioned some limitation on their model. And also we have limitation of the some variables we are missing. For example, the soil structure, air pollution, humidity, the shade of the tree cover. These variables can affect the temperature and the local precipitation. And also due to the time constraint, we couldn't add these variables. In our future works, we are planning to add these variables. Also, we don't have the feedback loop. We don't have the feedback loop of our models. Thanks for listening us.